first up on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I will be a
Allison, Jen a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next up is public comment. And I want to remind trustees and public that it is 5 minutes per person, and the trustees do not. Would you like to speak?
Yes, just briefly.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes.
All right, that's, my name is Mary Romeo McCarthy, and I believe I've met most of you before. I am simply referencing the continued support of the North Albany Academy, Kelly Kimbrough, who couldn't be here tonight, the teachers, the students, and the community to continue the North Albany Library branch. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, minutes. Noticed one error, and Mike is listed as the vice president, and it's not him, it's Andy. Staff, did you hear me?
Yep, got it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anything else? I take a motion to approve the minutes from the January meeting.
Motion?
Sarah, and
Second.
Brenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, treasurer's report and check register.
Just one thing on the treasurer's report, I just want you to know that the treasurer's, this is the preliminary end of the year, because we had the audit last week, so if the auditors make any journal entries, then we will give you an amended report. But just on the short synopsis, to the modified budget, we came in exactly on the revenue estimate and lower on the cost estimate. So for the year, the revenue was on the modified budget, and right now it looks like it was $69,000.
So what was the difference? What
The
was
difference, when you look in the last column, and you look at the percent of the modified budget expended, the costs that came in lower were occupancy costs, material costs, and some administrative costs, and IT came in a little higher.
I just want to reference check 8089, which is to the CDTA. It's a sizable amount of money. This is the CDTA's portion of the Navigator card money. In January and February, Navigator card purchasing skyrocketed, which is a good thing. It does generate some revenue for us and bring some new people in the door.
What is the percentage that we?
Right now, I think it's 3, but I think they've already said they're willing to.
They're what?
They're willing to renegotiate.
Yeah, because they're doing really well
Yeah, they're
with our
doing much
library.
better than they expected, and they're doing well because of places like the library.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to renegotiate with them once the 1-year agreement's up.
And when is that?
I think it is
Mid-year.
mid-year, yeah,
Yep.
June or
No,
July.
June you have it.
Any other questions or comments?
I had 2 questions.
Okay.
One, I saw a lot of museum passes. Do we buy all the museum passes at the same time, or are they spread out throughout the year?
Go.
We buy
Usually
them all at the same time.
Yeah, in the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Because it's an annual renewal,
Yeah.
and, we start
But
in
Albany
January.
Institute is on this one. Is that why you're asking?
What's that?
Because the Albany Institute is on this one?
There's quite a few.
Yeah.
I just saw the throughout. I figured I'd ask. And then the other question I had was the Simplex Grinnell. What is that for? Because I knew we brought maintenance in-house.
Alarms.
That's alarms.
The alarm system.
Okay.
We brought snow plowing in-house. That's what we brought in-house.
Anything else? I'll take a motion to approve the check register.
Motion.
And second.
I'll second it.
Melissa, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Committee and liaison reports. So we have an executive committee report first. I should know about that. Did the executive committee report get in the agenda, in the back board packet?
No, mine starts with finance.
Executive committee minutes aren't in the,
There.
You'll find them.
not executive committee. Finance, policy governance, ad hoc, strategic plan.
I think I don't know that I got those. I think I was thinking the strategic plan out of the ones. I don't think I saw executive.
Sorry, I should notice that draft packets. So I did write them. So what did we talk about? Well, no decisions were made, no actions were taken. So it was just kind of informational minutes. We talked a lot about, help me out, executive committee, board engagement, right? We talked about,
Evaluation.
evaluation, we talked about seating, so you notice this month we're, trustees are sitting in different places than the staff. And we talked about, things we're gonna work on over the year. Trying to remember.
I'm sorry, what was about the seating?
So the staff are on that end of the table and we have cards for trustees, so it's clear who's a
Color
trustee and
coordinated.
who's staff.
Oh, I see,
Oh,
color
so
coordinated. Huh.
Thank you so much.
I was looking at like the color combination and thinking it was somebody was having some fun with it. Now I get there's a method.
Okay. So we talked about board communication and how that's going and how to improve it. We looked at the annual board meeting calendar, thinking about how meetings, the agenda for meetings going over the year and maybe addressing that in future meetings.
Bless you. Thank you.
We talked about training, maybe working on training during board meetings, pardon me. And some of the things we're gonna work on this year are creating a job description for trustees as well as committees, and perhaps developing some committee objectives, so there's a little more direction and clarity on what's expected and what the work's gonna be. So, we'll make sure, the executive committee notes are in the board trustee portal, and we'll make sure they're available to everybody. Brenda or Allison, anything to add to them? Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Welcome.
Just a quick question, when you talk about training, are you talking about job training, are you talking about that for trustees, like
Mhm.
training during the meet, okay.
Yep. Okay, finance committee.
Right, we met on January 31st, and we really met to talk about two specific things. The 5-year financial plan, which we will talk about later and discuss, but just about talking how much fund balance would be used for that and what specific, why we're using that fund balance and targeting it. And then budget options, we looked at a variety of budget options, which we will talk about again later on, but just different options that included tax increases, the staffing changes, no tax increases, putting some additional money in because salaries might change, people might change positions, and then also if there was no tax increase but we closed North Albany, and also if we went fine free. So we looked at a variety of different options that we can discuss later on in the meeting. And That's about it. Did you want to add anything, Sarah?
That was those two things.
Great. Mike?
No, that was
Okay.
a wonderful assessment.
Thank you, Allison. All right, next up is policy and governance.
On the policy meeting, we met on the 6th of February, and we looked at 3 policies. Hazardous material policy was the first, and we made just a few changes with that, such as the name of it. It was hazard communication standard, so now it's the hazardous material policy. And the abbreviations are to be identified in the document. And that was fairly straightforward. It was a great policy, so we didn't have to do much with that. Albany made policy, that was fine. The purpose was broken up into 2 sentences instead of just a 1 long blurb, so that was fine. The work schedule, flex time and overtime, compensatory time policy for administrative staff. We did take a look at that and found that it was obsolete because during the summer, we approved the administrative staff MC designated title statement of compensation, benefits, and work expectation. So we did that this summer. But since then, we spoke to the attorney. We're just going to pull that back and table that just to ensure that the old policy and the new policy we did this summer certainly has both elements and both of those before we remove one. We also looked at the policy grid and we reviewed that. The Washington Library closing. We thought that should come off of the grid because it's internal. Fine limit and overdue fine structure to be postponed because that's a bigger conversation. And board code conduct to be rolled over to the board trustees. That's everything in a nutshell.
Any questions or comments? And we'll go into the policies in more detail later.
Yep.
in the
Look.
agenda.
Just so everyone's clear, Washington Library closing is the nightly closing procedures.
Procedures, yes.
Yeah, it's a procedure,
Right.
not a policy.
So
which is-
I was on policy committee, but I know there's a visitor talking about closing a branch here, and I want to make sure everybody knows
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not what it is.
I was wondering about that.
No, no.
I did that for you.
It's the closing procedures, and it's,
Yes.
as we stated
Yes.
in the committee meeting, that gets looked at almost every 6 months internally, and changes are made with the, as necessitated by what's going on at the branch. So we figured since that one's on a constant internal review, that could probably be removed from the policy grid, because it is also a procedure rather than a policy.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the strategic plan ad hoc committee. So we'll talk about this more later, but the committee met with Scott and Melanie and the consultant to finalize some of the changes to the strategic plan that we hope you will approve tonight. We'll just go over that later. So I just want to thank everybody, all the chairs and the staff for getting the minutes in on time.
I'm sorry, what was that?
All the minutes were in the packet, except for the staff with the executive committee minutes, and I'm grateful that everyone got their minutes in. So thank you. Okay, policies and procedures grid.
So as we said, we had the 2 that will come up tonight for vote, the Albany Made and the hazardous materials, and I just realized I highlighted the wrong 2. Comp time for flex, we're gonna talk to the lawyer just to make sure that one is because we have the 2 conflicting, or 2 complementary policies. Is it okay to remove the one and have the other? So we're gonna talk to legal about that. And then the fine limit and overdue fine structure, that is going to be our next topic for our next Kaizen event that we do this year. So even though it's due it was coming up due in May of 2017. We're gonna hold off on that discussion for those two, but they are also procedures rather than policies. So, and the two, as you can see, they're the two blank ones under the board policies, the ones that don't have dates on them. Board member expectations and board code of conduct. I've gone through the notes and everything. These were put on the policy grid, and they were supposed to be discussed by the board at some point, and never fully got fleshed out by the board. So that's something that's really not part of the APL staff side policies of things. That's something that you as a board need to address. And the conversation in the policy and governance committee was that it's actually too large for just the committee. The whole board should be having that discussion for those two.
So do those exist?
They do not exist.
Oh.
No, so it should be.
Yeah, so we thought we might,
moved off the grid.
yeah, and potentially at some point go into executive session for that discussion, which seems complementary what you were talking about in executive committee.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we need, we'll talk about it. We
Yeah.
do it moving
Yeah.
forward. Okay,
Doesn't have to be a secret.
is that it, Melanie?
That is it. We're on track.
Any comments, questions? All right. Director's report.
So in January, the Youth Services Department at Washington Avenue started doing a preschool yoga program. Arbor Hill did a model car program. Box celebrated National Soup Day. Pine Hills successfully relaunched its integrated play club, which we're very happy about. They found the right time, families, and place, and we have people traveling to it from outside of Albany. Delaware started a mystery-themed book club, and Howe hosted a very successful social justice film festival. North Albany noted an increase in use from the Albany International Center classes. Administration was busy with the library's annual audit and annual state report. The offices on the third floor of Washington Avenue are finished and everybody has moved in. And the facilities department has been moved to the basement of Pine Hills in the hopes of alleviating some of the parking congestion at Washington Avenue, but also to kind of spread operations out between all the branches. February brings the start of tax season at Washington Avenue in Delaware this year. Pine Hills hosted a very successful book launch for the history of here. And the Friends of the Foundation will be joining the library advocates from across the state on Advocacy Day, which is February 28th. We are excited to see those two groups work together. Facilities just got its new additional truck with plowing capabilities the other day, which we had a couple weeks ago. And we're ramping up our annual community report. A reminder that we did over 20 public presentations last year, and the calendar, the Board of Trustees calendar, will have all of those events listed on them, and also a list will go out. The public really wants to see trustees at these meetings. We're doing a pretty, I think we're,
12 or 13.
yeah, 12 or 13 right now. I'm sure we will hit that 20 mark. And it's about a 10 to 15 minute presentation. We get a lot of, depending on the neighborhood association, we get a lot of questions. And that's it. I'll open the floor to questions.
I'll just say that I would also like to see trustees at these meetings, so please try to get to at least one.
So you say there's an increase in use by the International Center School classes?
Yes. If
So-
you look around,
yeah.
those paintings are.
Yeah, what's that about?
They're from they're from an art show over there, and they've loaned them to us for us to display.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
really great collaboration. Glad to see some artwork on the wall. And it looks kind of interesting.
And I was here for one of the artists seeing that their painting was on the wall. It was kind of nice.
And when you say increase, you mean classes are coming or kids after school are
More
coming?
classes are coming during the day.
I see. And in the year-to-dates categories here, so this is the report for January?
Yes.
Okay, so it's year-to-date.
It's comparing January of last year to January of this year.
Right. So our numbers are you know, they're kind of weird.
Circulation, we'll talk about the state report next meeting. Circulation, we all know, has been taking a huge dip. What we found out when we did the state report was it is DVDs. So about 3 years ago, DVDs were 50% of our circulation. I would say now they're 40% of our circulation. So almost all of the decrease in circulation has to do with DVDs and streaming.
And the Wi-Fi difference is because we started having people sign on.
Yes.
And so is that delivering higher bandwidth?
Yes, it's delivering higher bandwidth and a more kind of quality experience because the routers aren't kind of getting inundated with IP requests.
What's the deal with reference, you think?
That's like my least favorite
Sweet thing.
statistic. It's self-reported. So if you're super busy, you're probably not reporting everything you're getting.
We do you guys have lib guides or
We just started LibCal
yeah?
with the same product. We haven't implemented the LibGuides portion of that yet, just because that's geared more towards academic than it
Yeah.
is for public. We thought we'd roll out the LibCal first before we inundate that.
How does that address reference?
So when I get a reference request, there's this thing called Lib Answers, which allows for chat reference and also lets you put reference stats in real time. So every time I get a question, I use Lib Answers to put my reference query in, and I'm able to do my due diligence because I can say if I referred them somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a nice solution. But also reference is just going down because of Google, which I hate to say, but
We saw a spike in reference not last year but the year before.
Yeah.
And we kind of figured it was because we were watching it a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
But, again, the library transactions are much longer now.
yes, you get
So-
in-depth questions rather than free
Yeah,
ones.
you don't get what's the address to the burrito place downtown.
Yeah.
So then, does it make sense to start revising what we're counting if these are not reflecting?
Yes. So if you look at if you look at our statistics for the last 5 years, the metrics we've really focused on is program participation, which has gone up every year, and room usage. And that's really kind of led our conversations
Yeah.
in the last few years about how do we change staffing, how do we right-size branches. And that's where we really are seeing our growth is there. And then computer usage is flat, but our computer usage has always been big.
So I'm going to make a recommendation that the way that we indicate this on our report is almost kind of prioritization of a former time. And if that's not how we're prioritizing or using this information for strategic planning, then I wouldn't put it in this same order.
Okay.
Switch them up.
I
Because
will-
frankly, what happens is that you're telling the story of lower numbers before higher numbers.
If you go into the board portal now has a page that kind of gives you some statistics. It's the 4 statistics we really pay attention to, which is program numbers, room usage numbers, and circulation. We're always going to pay attention to circulation and computers. There, I actually have program numbers first because that's our
All
most
right,
successful.
well,
That's our
let's
most
shift that
successful
up,
metric.
because, yeah,
Most successful in the sense that it's increasing? Because obviously the overall numbers are different.
Yes.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. While we're working on these, would there be any way, I understand why we're doing year-to-date change, seasonal, snow, I can understand differences in attendance and meeting usage. Is there a way to see maybe on a chart or a graph, an annual?
Yeah.
So we can see how it's trending
The
month
trending.
to month?
yeah.
And then possibly if we could go back maybe 3 to 5 years, say do it on a graph with dots for each month and each year have a different color?
So-
we can kind of see an annual trend or just have the years separate?
If you go into the board packet, there's something that, what it does, the graphs in the, I mean, not board packet, the graphs in the board portal, it's a line graph that shows you month to month. What it does is it compares this year, last year, and then a 3-year average for 17, 16, and 15.
Perfect.
So, and I did that with the finance stuff that's in the portal as well. And we can start using those graphics in the board report as opposed to maybe doing how we're doing them now. I can tell you, talking to different executive directors, they're saying that they're seeing their boards are kind of getting metrics overdoses, and that they typically, this was actually a bunch of librarian directors, they typically only report one or two metrics per board meeting. I'm not a fan of that. I think you guys should get all the information, but we can highlight some things, because we definitely need to highlight where we're being successful.
I have a question about facilities in the basement of Pine Hills. As I remember, Pine Hills basement was not particularly lovely and had some flooding problems.
The flooding is only over by the vault, so it's not where they are, and it's nice. I would bet money Pine Hills is a nicer basement than Washington Avenue, and there's less health hazards.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to be.
They weren't overly positive about it at first, but from what we're gathering, they're actually pretty happy over there.
Are there any, I mean, that's on bus lines as well.
Yes.
So.
It's on.
Bus lines.
Oh, yeah.
Just Washington is such a central.
Where the majority of our maintenance guys drive, and
Okay.
our maintenance people drive. And one reason why we're doing this is it makes 4 or 5 less cars, staff cars in the lot during the day.
That's great.
And could you help me remember when nominating committee starts stuff soon, right?
Doesn't need to meet.
You can meet if you want to, but there's no trustees up for election this year.
Oh, for reminding.
Any other questions?
I just want to comment, I think it's really nice that they're putting thank you notes in the books when returning them to other libraries. It's a nice gesture.
Okay, moving on. North Albany branch update.
So I'm going to pass the baton over to Scott since you had the conversation.
So I emailed Steve Longo on January 9th after our North Albany meeting. Steve is a very busy person that is a large organization. He and I spoke again about 2 weeks later, and then I gave him a call again today. His lawyer was away, that's why they haven't been able to look at the documents. He was on an extended vacation, but they did look at them today, and they want me to contact them either Thursday or Friday or some of next week, which they'll have to wait till the week after. But and they said there's just some wording in there that they're trying to wrap their heads around, and that they'll have an answer to us with the paperwork in a week or two.
So this was their original grant application?
Yeah, this was the Hope 6 grant.
And we're hoping that it has some information about what the agreement between the library Y and the city and Albany Housing, because that's not clear.
Nope.
And that can inform our decisions moving forward.
Excellent.
Any other updates for North Albany?
Brenda has the committee, the ad hoc, community
No,
action
they're not,
group. Yeah.
no, they're not going to meet until we establish what our position is here. So rather than, we had discussed that before too, and also mentioned this, or we had a discussion with Kelly as well, as far as what space, are we actually allotted here? Conversation about rent, should we really be paying rent or not? So we're trying to get those answers first, so that when we come together and do meet, we at least know what we're dealing with, what space we have, what space we don't have, whether we're paying rent, whether we're not. So those things really need to be answered so that at least we can have something that's reasonable. We don't even know what the position of this library really is.
Have we ever not paid rent here, like in the beginning? Was there a full year that we didn't pay rent?
No,
We paid rent from the beginning?
I'm pretty sure although we never signed the agreement, I'm pretty sure the library signed off on it, because I remember that being a discussion when we opened, in a somewhat heated discussion.
Brenda, could you tell us how large the advisory committee is and who's on it?
I don't have all the names, but that's one of the members over there. Nine folks.
Okay.
Yeah, 9 folks. And again, we haven't met yet.
Right, so and when you do meet, can you make sure that it's on board calendar and that we all know about it? All right, thank you. Strategic plan review. Okay. So, strategic plan is from pages 26 to 31. And we got a couple of comments from folks, and Alyssa, Sarah, and I, Scott, Melanie, and the consultant a couple of weeks ago went through those comments, added some more comments to help clarify some questions and concerns. And so what we did was we streamlined the executive summary to make it simpler and more clear. We adjusted the values statements to make them more clear. We were, Sarah and Alyssa, please jump in. We got rid of one.
The vision.
Oh, right. That was just a space holder. No, and we changed some values.
We added diversity. Actually, I think we had those values, but we had called it empathy, and I think we renamed it diversity and added new values for empathy.
Yes, right. And we changed the definition of integrity because we didn't agree with what was written there. So we just tried to clarify what those values were. We made some minor edits on the strategic goals, but reordered them so that community needs came first. And then we made some changes on some, I think we only changed 3 or 4 different objectives, but we spent a lot of time trying to get them right. So, go ahead.
So we, the committee, put this forward to the board. We feel really good about it. We feel that it, the executive summary summarizes the really essential components of those 4 pillars. And that this is a great jumping off point for the staff and administration to work up a work plan that addresses these goals and objectives. So we, particularly Sarah and I, felt that the executive summary should really follow those 4 pillars. So we really tightened that up. So this should reference itself. It should be absolutely clear these are the things that we're committed to. And so the committee puts this forward as our recommendation. So unless you're really like just, we've completely blown it or forgotten something, we'd love for you to support it.
It's a great job.
I don't feel that you've completely blown it.
Well, I don't know, Sarah and I kept bringing up things.
Any other comments or questions?
So educates, empowers, and entertains and empowers is, I know that you had said you were fiddling with it.
That's been the mission statement for a long time.
Yeah.
And we really did not revisit that
Yeah.
in this process.
Not that I think it's nice.
Okay, so is a recommendation from a committee, so that's the first. I'll take a second from somebody. Allison, thank you. All right. The motion is is for the board of trustees to accept the strategic plan, adopt the strategic plan. Okay. Who would say discussion?
Any discussion?
Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you all, thank you so much for all the time and effort you've all put into doing this, staff as well as a board. I'm really pleased with what we came up with, and I look forward to seeing the detailed plans and then how we as a board can monitor progress. Okay, 5-year financial plan.
So we brought the 5-year financial plan up back in November, December. And at that time, we decided to table it because we wanted to make sure that the unrestricted fund balance the restricted fund balance was in here and accounted for. And so we talked and we said that at this point, for this year's 5-year plan, that we are comfortable using a 20% projection of the fund balance, but in years going for earmarks, but in years going forward, we really want to work with facilities to know exactly what things the money needs to be spent on. But since we don't have a full facilities plan in place right now, we can't say we're gonna spend this much towards a vehicle or this much in fixing a building. So right now, we just need to use a percentage point. Anyone else would like to comment? Who was there? Sarah and Mike?
No, I think that's pretty accurate.
So I was confused about that part, and so I thought that the future numbers for the fund balance would change in terms of how much is used in the budget. So if only $1 million is available for library operations, then we need to change the future numbers, right? The future fund balance numbers, because we can only use $1 million. Is that
Karen, the earmarks is 2.6 million, right? So that was what was going to be spread over the 5 years. So that's the 20% of the 2.6 million. And so then if you use 20% of 2.6 million, that's a 520,000 that we put on every year. So then it shows you what is remaining at the end, fund balance of the end of the year, each year. So that's what it does in the bottom of the chart.
okay? But how does it affect the numbers on the?
The way
above?
that the chart previously had not had the restricted fund balance usage on the chart. So the fund balance at the end of the year would have been 520,000 higher each year because it didn't account for using some of those earmarked monies. So the prior one wouldn't have the last 2 lines on it, the prior one that we had in the December meeting.
But how does it affect the surplus deficit line?
Because the very last line on the chart, fund balance at the end of the year, if we use the 520,000, that's what's telling you what is remaining at the end of 2018, 19, 20, all the way to 2022.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I still think the 5-year plan is grossly overestimating expenses. And I know I did share this concern the day after our finance committee meeting via email with Mary and Scott, and I CC'd the other finance committee members. I had gone through our past budgets and expenditures from the past few years, and I know we do have a history of over-projecting expenses. So even while, and we'll get to the budget in new business, our proposed budgets, and even while I think, we project going into the fund balance for $500,000, I don't believe that projection to be accurate, just based on, what was that?
It was like
Grass.
a snowball maybe.
Stupid kids have nothing to do.
It was just a little pepper.
Nice.
Yeah, just based on past expenditures. I did point a few line items out and a few sections of the 5-year plan and our budget options, which don't line up. And while I understand they won't always be perfect, I do think there are noticeable gaps, and I would like to see the 5-year plan reworked.
That's fine, we can rework it. The point that I was telling Sarah is when somebody gives you assumptions and you put them in a forecast, if they say they're going to add a new employee, or if some expense is going to go up and you put it in a projection, it obviously, if you wind up not adding that employee or not spending that money, obviously it would change. So the projection can, obviously, if we decide, I think your point is when it comes to operations, probably, or operation-wise, more careful than sometimes what the projection is, but this is a future forecast and based on saying this will go up 2% a year or whatever, it's a high-level forecast, so that's how this all comes up in the projection.
Sure.
But what she's saying is you could sharpen the pencil and lower the projections of the expenses.
Well, not I mean, I guess lower, just more accuracy. And I know a section of the projection that I struggled with is regarding materials and having completely different line items from the options we were presented for the budget and from what the actual 5-year plan projects. And I believe that the options presented to us come in $60,000 lower than the 5-year plan, and they have different line items. So just as a trustee in my first year who wasn't familiar with that, I wasn't sure if there was an actual change in how things were being worked. I was concerned we were going to budget $60,000 less than what we needed. So I understand salaries fluctuate, but certain things like fixed costs we can fix, such as material expenditures. I know other things, it seems that we weren't spending money on telephones in the past, but we're continuing to budget an expenditure. So there were just a couple line items where I was unsure of.
So as compared to our budget, so you're saying like the materials, it's broken out differently on 5-year plan than it is on our budget?
Yes. Instead of actually I have it right here. So on the 5-year financial plan, materials come out to $715,000 total, with the line item for books at $444,000, central library at $205,000, online services for $65,000. But on all of the options we were presented, materials total $655,000, which is $60,000 less, with the books line item coming in at $610,000, no line item for central library, and online services $45,000. So I was unsure of the discrepancy.
Pardon me, I have a question, Mary, just because I haven't had an opportunity to look at these numbers since the Finance Committee meeting. So, even if going back a couple years and looking at these 5-year plans, we ended up overestimating expenditures, we still would be drawing $500,000 from in this year's budget from the fund balance, correct? So even if we had a history of overestimating expenditures, it still didn't provide enough cushion to prevent us from dipping into the fund balance significantly. Is that an accurate statement?
Just backing up, Sarah's point about the couple of years that we've made, a little bit of money is true. But if you remember, I think it was 3 years ago, we used $1 million out of the fund balance. So everything in this entire forecast is predicated on assumptions. So certain assumptions, her point about the mix in some of those line items is fair. So yes, we can go back and tweak those numbers, but the usage of the fund balance is all based on whatever assumptions are in that year. I mean, that's the bottom line of this. So if we wound up deciding to cut back on some expenses, then you wouldn't use as much of the fund balance as the forecast says. So I don't have an issue with tweaking the numbers again. That's completely
Oh, yeah, no, that's,
fine.
I mean,
But
that seems reasonable.
the assumptions are the assumptions that I'm given to work with. The tweaking part is fine. The bottom line, the subtotals,
When you say assumptions, you're talking about the level of our operation.
yeah, and
Like
how
what?
much are you gonna spend on books? How much are you gonna spend on the, you know, if you have a great year on weather, does it impact it? Of course it does, you know, those kinds of things. Are we gonna spend, you know, money on the buildings? If we put money into the buildings, then obviously we use more, that kind of thing.
Mike, to your point, if you go to page 6 of our packet, you'll see that in the first column, we projected to use $340,000, and we didn't end up using anything. I would say that that's the same thing we're looking at now
But-
with projecting to use
And
$500,000.
but Sarah, in terms of that, that's, when you look at that and you look at the percentage of, obviously, our projection in terms of the modified budget, which is, we do the budget 2 years in advance. If the forecast on the revenue came in to the original budget of 95% and 96%, that's very close, but the big categories, yeah, if people underspend a line, then yes, it's gonna come in under. So that's based on working with staff to say, they're giving me the assumptions to put in.
I guess my only question, a few years ago, when we went $1 million over, was
Yeah.
that tied, was it a capital expenditure or
It
was
was
that?
primarily all the projects that were done on Washington Avenue and they weren't planned for.
No, and that's why, again, I've said before, I really think we should have, and I understand we're waiting for the facilities committee to put this together, but I would really like to see a separate operating budget and a separate budget for capital
And
expenditures.
I have no issue, we said that. We're with
I
you
would love
there.
to pull those
Yep.
lines out of the
And I would love to
operating.
have a facilities plan.
So I also have a couple of concerns about the 5-year budget, and I understand that forecasting is very difficult and there's all sorts of factors that go into it. But there are some things that are some errors I noticed on that surplus deficit fund balance use line. So it may be for this year that the final numbers came in too late to change this, but it still has on the 5-year projection that we'll be using $49,000.
Because the 5-year, just so you understand, I could have modified it afterwards, but this was done in 3rd quarter of last year, so it wasn't meant to be changed again for last year when we did that 5-year plan. We can modify it to put in the actual what it came in. That's not a problem, but if you do a projection and you present it to the committee in September, which is when this was done, and that was all the forecasts at that time, that was the forecast at that time.
Right. The other thing is that the 2018 budget that we approved, that voters approved last year,
Yeah.
All of my notes say that we're using $280,000 of fund balance.
I we have in the packet, yes, it is, yeah, but that was not the budget in the forecast, that is the estimate at that point in time. So, we did the budget a year ago, and this is a forecast that was done, this is an estimate, it's not the budget. So that was done, again, last September.
So, if I can speak, one thing I'd like to see, or one thing I'm gonna request, and we'll see a little bit different, is next year, I'd like to actually do the 5-year plan board's comfortable with it in January or in the beginning of February when all the closing numbers from the year before come in. I think that'll give us a much clearer, more accurate forecast, and then we can adjust the numbers. There also will be some accounting things that I want to do a little bit differently, and then there's some changes that I'd like that we're going to make to the 5 year.
Oh, so it's a timing issue. So we started this 5-year plan in 2017 before we finished the books. We didn't go and put in the 2018 actuals because we're still working on I see, okay.
Yeah.
So this is not an accurate reflection.
Well, it's not enough.
Every time we see it, it's we're working on the same plan.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need to change up the way we do it, because
I think
don't
one
think
of
it's giving
Sarah's main
us-
points, which I also agree with, is she's just basically saying, are you really gonna spend, that amount of money?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
as I was saying, we need to be more accurate because we're making some large decisions based on this 5-year plan. Whether it comes to budget vote, or closing branches, or modifying hours and branches, or fine free, those are all, and I think that's why we're looking at the numbers a little deeper now, because we're trying to make some major decisions and we can't make those major decisions the way we're currently doing this projection and the way we're currently doing our treasurer's reports.
I have a question. When was the last time Albany Public was audited by the comptroller's office?
It was, not this past year, the year before.
And we got a clean bill of
We got
health?
a very clean audit,
Sterling.
and this is a lot, that's the whole point even of this.
Right.
This is a lot more detailed than, the subcategories of this are on. So everything that we, even to have this, is huge to the control.
And the comptroller during the process of the audit looks back several years,
Yes,
examines
yes.
year-to-year budgeting practices.
Yes, and one of the big things they look in is controllership to make sure that all the things are in that, obviously nobody's stealing money or
Right.
anything like that, yeah.
And I haven't read that report in a while, but I mean, a
Yes.
sterling report about our
They
budgeting
told us to do
practices.
one thing and we did it, so, yes.
You did it before they issued the report,
Yes.
actually, as I recall.
Yes.
I think the 5-year report is really helpful. I really didn't like it, but as Scott said, we're making major decisions, and so some of these, I want to make sure that we can be as accurate as
Yeah.
as we can,
Yep.
so that we.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
But on the other hand, we also need the administration to have some flexibility to deal with what's in front of them. And if they're, a 4% difference in the budget and the modified budget in a year that's, unpredictable with our numbers changing in certain things and construction issues, I don't, that does not bother me
I'd
so
like to
much.
keep it under 4%.
Okay, well,
That's a goal.
all right.
The thing is, the numbers are.
Overachiever.
If people don't spend some of the money and they put it in the forecast, that's not a reflection on the forecast.
Right.
And just to say, there's been years where I could see that, healthcare was assumed 12% and it's been as high as 20%. And that was a really tough year with the budget. So it's a guide, and when the guide was created, it was several months ago, which is why the numbers are quite different. And we can always get better, but I think we have to go with, this is what we have right now, so we either need to make a decision to approve it, or if people are unhappy, then to relook at it.
If we're to that point, I'd like to make a motion to approve 5-year plan.
And that should be the second, because we had voted for it during our committee.
Thank you. Okay, so, all in favor of approving, is there any other discussion?
Can he second if he's on the committee?
Oh,
I will
know-
second.
Okay.
Sounds good. I don't feel upstaged.
Sorry, Mike.
Okay, so just further discussion on that.
One last thing, sorry. While I understand healthcare and salary and things like that are more flexible and can fluctuate, and that's a large piece of our budget, I would like to see, and maybe it's not feasible right this moment, but maybe in the next 6 months when we get a facilities plan together and we're able to better earmark capital expenditures in the reserve fund, I think I would like to see half of the reserve fund or some portion or percentage of the reserve fund reserved for those unforeseen expenses that may come up, once in a 5-year basis. But I would like to keep our actual annual operating budget, like Scott said, under a 4% variance. But I do understand that health costs and salaries can fluctuate.
It's always important to remember that salaries and healthcare and everything combined with staffing is about 75% of our
Sure.
budget. So not to sound like a broken record, but there is now a metric kind of graph in the Board of Trustees portal that I chart every payroll, and that's actually healthcare costs and payroll. So that should be a good way to kind of monitor every 2 weeks how we're doing budget-wise.
And just so you're aware, Sarah, when we started this discussion, Scott and Mary and I, that is the exact same thing I said about the facilities. What are we planning on spending this year? So hopefully that will guide the future.
So the plan is to make this more accurate,
Yes.
and what time frame is that?
Are you talking about the motion on the floor or in the future?
Yes.
Well, we're talking about doing this again for next January. So this would be the one that we keep for this year, and then we would have a much clearer 5-year plan for next January. That's what that's the motion on the floor.
The motion on the floor, I believe, is to adopt this.
Right, this.
Right, but then the idea is that
what's-
this won't be updated.
That was the motion on the floor, that it will not be updated, but going forward, that this will be presented in January or February and be much more clear using the new accounting changes.
So another clarifying question. So Mary, you said that the estimate for 2018 is different than the budget that was
The estimate is an
approved.
estimate because, when I did the budget for 2018, that was done in January of last year. So when I did the estimate for 2018 here, I did that in September with everything I had known. But even when I was doing the estimate for 2018, we didn't even have, the finalized contract, everything. So, the estimate, with anything new that we knew, it got put into 2018.
Okay, so we're anticipating
So
spending.
it is,
the budget.
when we do the 5-year plan, we usually do it in September, October. We put in the September actuals, you'll see it, and then we forecast out the end. And then everything that we know at that point in time becomes an estimate for 2018. And then we make assumptions on the out years to roll it. And given that you all are on the committee, obviously, before we present it back to the board, we'll meet in committee, and any changes you want happen, I'll obviously do, and we'll discuss it and we'll change it to your liking.
Okay. All right. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and then back
So what was the vote there?
5 to 3. It's 5 to 3. Okay. Moving on to the proposed 2019 budget.
Okay. Let me just get there. we talked, at the finance committee meeting, like I said, we looked at various, different options. And what we had talked about was, several options where the only change was the percentage that we would go out and ask, either 0, 1%, 1.5, 2%. One of the things that was was a $25,000 added in case of salary changes. And then another option we looked at was adding in $100,000 in staff changes, hoping to have a social worker or case manager, and we talked about a board secretary for that one. But we had talked about changing that and just having the social worker case manager at this time. And we felt that we couldn't make a decision about going fine free at this moment because we really need more data about how much revenue we get from that, where would we make up that revenue in our budget. And that had to be a much bigger conversation. We talked about we should be receiving less money from a New York State grant. But in your packet on page 35 talks about if we went out for a certain amount of increase, what that would look like, I believe.
Wait, we should be receiving less money from a New York State grant?
I was gonna clarify that, not that we should or we would like to, but we're anticipating, so we updated the budget options to reflect that.
Okay.
No, we didn't want to, I'm sorry. It's kind of unfortunate that we
Oh,
did.
because of that grant, yeah.
The majority of it is construction work.
Yeah.
And then, they have the different options in here on page 34 about the different increases and how much fund balance will be used. And you can see if we went out if we didn't ask for an increase at all, we would be using $526,764 of the fund balance. And then we went all the way down to 5%, which would be using $95,141 of the fund balance. So even with a 5% ask, we would still have to tap into the fund balance as projected at this moment. Questions, comments?
Just, sorry, talk to me like I'm 5, but we would still be using the fund balance as projected by this moment, given that the projections are maybe overzealous. Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
stretching, going off the past few years, which I had access to, and then, like I said, I would love to see earlier years, budgets and actual expenditures. But if we've been 4 or 5% off on the projection, if we look at option 1 where it's saying we'll tap into our fund balance by $526,000 if we don't raise taxes, I mean, I can't throw a number out, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would like to think it would be much less than that, possibly tap into 100,000. Obviously, it depends on a lot of other factors. We could, health insurance, we could have something go through the roof. But judging by what our expenses came in last year and depending on what they do this year, I think our expenditures would be closer to the revenue than the projection.
Just remember that in the contract, obviously, all the union people are getting raises. So that's something that's a key driver of the cost for the library. So when you look at the sheet that has the projection for 2019, it's a bottoms-up forecast of all the people that are presently working in the library with exactly what the raise is going to be. With the retirement system, again, it's a forecast, it's based on the percentage of what we came in at last year. The health insurance is what we know as of today, but to your point, that could go up or down, not exactly sure. And then when you look at the other key categories, if you look at facilities cost, that went up, and the other categories are held tight within the budget. So that's how the budget was put together.
So on page 36, 2018, is that based on the budget for 2018 or the estimate?
Mine packet is, yep, that's 36, so what's your question?
Is that budget, the numbers there are for 2018 or?
2018 is a budget, and
Budget, yeah.
2019 is a proposed budget. I
So-
do have all the options, Allison, but we didn't wanna inundate everybody, so I can give you that after.
But what you don't have is the actual 28.
I don't have the actual
2018.
2017, but you have that earlier in your packet.
Right, but for 2018, you just said that you revised the estimates in the 5-year plan.
In the
so
5-year plan, yeah,
that-
because that's a different, this is 2018 budget versus 2019 budget.
So how firm would the numbers be when we go to the taxpayers? Like, will we have,
Well,
Yeah.
when you do a budget, you just have to say what you obviously put in there.
I hope my question made sense. I'm getting my.
Yeah, I can,
No, you can, it's
Yeah.
fine.
I believe we would approve the budget, with an ask in mind and then go out to the public for, which would be voted on in the May election. And if we didn't receive the tax increase, if we were asking for one, then we would go into our fund balance.
Okay, so the fund balance is like, Just
If
in
we budgeted, I'm
case.
sorry, if we budgeted an increase and did not get that.
and did not get the
and
increase,
needed the
that's
money,
when the fund
then we
balance
go
would
into the
be.
fund balance.
Thank you.
No.
No, we're going
We're
into
going
the
to
fund
the
balance
fund balance
regardless.
no matter
Going to
what.
fund balance no
You're
matter
using
what.
the
No
fund
matter
balance.
what.
Yep.
The way it's budgeted right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Unless-
because
yeah.
90, even if
Right,
we
because every
do
option that you did had.
Yeah, unless you did
5%,
beyond
so
5%.
$95,000
We would have
that's
to
fund
cut from actual lines. We'd
If we
have to
didn't go into the
find
fund
savings from here.
Right, and I'm sorry, I wasn't not
No.
saying that, I was trying to explain, if a tax increase was voted down, then
Yeah, that's,
that money
we
would
would,
be made up for
in the fund
yes.
balance.
But
Okay,
I
thank
agree
you.
with, yes.
But to the point of Sarah's concern about our actuals and our projected is that if our projections are higher than they need to be, then our decision about going out for a tax increase, it's based on that projection. So we do have, that's the tricky place here, cause we don't wanna go out for more
Just,
than,
your one caveat is really about the salary cost, because there was a raise last year, there's a raise this year, so that's
Yeah.
completely in the projection. To your point on the other categories, if something comes in lower, you can save money there.
And I mean, the salaries, I'm seeing, an increase from 18 to 19 of 90,000 of the salaries, 10,000
You should be
of
looking
the-
at the budget now, because the salary is that, when we did the 18 budget, we did not have what the contract was when we did the 18 budget, but now we do have the contract, so we are going to spend.
yeah, so the projected, don't look at the
Right.
18 projected on the 5-year plan, because that was done in September.
Got it.
The 2018 budget, Mary just said that was done in January.
January of last year, yeah. But to Sarah's question about the 19, we basically know all the people that we have today, we know exactly what they're really going to make, both in 18 and 19, because they have a contract now.
So
That's
then-
one, that's the biggest cost category you really have is salary and benefits, which is, you definitely are going to spend at least 5.8 million on salary and benefits.
So we're looking at page 36 on the option, the total increase from the payroll and related costs from 18 to 19. Although the 18 was done in January, and I think you said
Yeah,
that became updated on the 5.
yes, it did.
Okay, so I'm looking at the 18 number on the 5-year and the 19 budget on the option. So the difference between that would be 100 and, just so we can figure out the known cost, the known
Right.
increase.
When we, so you're looking, the forecast has 2018 at 5.6 million, and the 2019 budget is 5.9 million on salary and benefits. Again, the things that changed within the forecast, not only the healthcare change, right, because we got a new healthcare again this year, that changed. and the rate for the, retirement changes, because I base it on the prior year. So I do update all those things in the forecast.
Mary, could you refresh my recollection? How long before we executed this new contract with the library employees and staff, had they been without a contract? Didn't they agree to forego negotiating to maintain a current level of benefits, right?
Yeah. And then they got a raise last year, and they got a retro lump sum last year. That was what happened in 2018. And then they got a raise on 1/1 of this year, and then they are also gonna get another percentage at their anniversary rate, which is good.
Just to clarify what she means by raises, so last year they got an overall raise as negotiated in the contract. They also have a step system that is rewards you for long, staying with the organization that you get after a good review every year on January 1st in the contract. We have now moved that, so it's awarded after the anniversary date.
And is the raise in addition to a built-in cost of living adjustment?
No, it's
No.
built in,
No,
it's
no, it's
the,
just,
So the raise is more like an annual cost of living adjustment?
Yes,
Raise.
and the step
Yes.
is more like a raise.
but let's just be clear on the expenditures here. Because the only ones that fluctuate are salaries, health insurance, rent if North Albany rent increases, and maintenance, repairs and supplies. I mean,
Yeah,
so
everything
we've got, so salaries are mandated, right, those increases. Health insurance is completely out of our control seemingly. And we have aging buildings. We're now at 10 years opening libraries. So we've already heard from a facilities point of view, we're gonna have to start replacing stuff. So we know those. Everything else has stayed exactly the same. So the question there is if you wanna change anything, it's decreasing those areas, and those areas, the biggest areas, are materials, which we could actually have a conversation about, and maybe we should, given circulation, DVDs, that issue. So, those are the big chunks. And to Sarah's point about really looking, these are comparing two budgets, not actual projected and budget. So we could try to tighten those up a little bit more, but my guess is that we are going to have to talk about materials. If you want to talk about reducing our fund balance, we have to talk about you want to talk about reducing our fund balance and not going out for an increase, we have to talk about reducing materials.
Well, and I said I was looking for more clarification between the 5-year plan and the budget and the $60,000 discrepancy as far as materials go. I think I don't know how long we've been at, I think it was 615,
610
for materials. And then, like I said, it jumped to 715. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure we were accounting for everything in the options and that we weren't shortchanging ourselves or, so again, when we're talking about up to a $500,000 or more deficit, a $60,000 discrepancy adds up.
So, remind me of the time frame for this budget. We look at it this month, we look at it again next month, and then by March we have to vote on it?
We have to
haven't
vote on
This
it next
is
month.
February.
This is February.
We have to have the vote in March.
We have to-
Yeah,
all right.
and then you decide if you're going up for the vote for an increase or not. Yeah. Point about materials, materials came in at 632 and their budget was 655. And materials in the budget is we gave them the same materials budget that they had before, so it's,
Which
it's
includes
20,000,
all of it?
you know.
Well, but in
Six
the,
fifty
It does
back.
it does have everything,
in the
so.
5-year plan, it added up to 715 instead of 650.
Okay,
And
okay.
that's where I was confused.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that it
Well,
wasn't,
something
we
else
weren't
is
hitting
getting
our
stuck
fund
in there,
balance.
that's
Wait,
why.
there's something probably central library that had it.
Yes.
We did
Okay.
move central library because that's what threw the budget off last year.
Right.
We did move central budget, CBA central book aid, which is about $200,000. We moved that out of our materials budget and into its own budget so that there's kind of like it's a clear kind of pass through, because it's not really our money to spend on books, it's the central libraries because it's all ebooks. So that should give us a little bit of a clearer picture. We typically don't get those checks in until September, so it's thrown our budget off.
So would it be, and I don't know where this gets reviewed, whether in finance and then a recommendation for next board meeting, but the 2017 actual, the 2018 revised,
That we can easily put them on one page
and
and get
then
them out to you.
2018 budgets, keep that, and the 2019 budget, does that,
Yeah, I mean, that's adding 2 columns, that's
Okay.
that's not a problem.
so then it gives you a sense of where you can do a little, play based on your actuals, and it is a guess, it's a guess whether we're gonna have, snow, I don't know,
And like
Well,
I
we're
said,
gonna
I'm
have
not even
snow.
talking about cutting so much as just, as my first year on the board, I'm just trying to figure out,
Yeah.
what actually happens, and, we're not spending on a telephone, then it's written in as a line item. I just don't know because I'm new, is this an expenditure?
Yeah.
Or, is this something we can take out if we're not spending? So I would kind of just like some more clarification on certain items. See if we can close the gap before getting to, the discussion on cutting.
But if we're gonna vote on the budget and, which includes the percent increase, then the discussion of how much we're actually spending is important because it takes off what we have to pull from fund balance, right?
The spending portion of the plan have been reviewed by the finance committee and by staff and by Scott, so that's what I brought forward to you. If we can easily do the actual and the estimate on one chart and bring it back to the finance committee. The board has to figure out, I mean, if you want that before the March meeting, no issue, but it's kind of still the main decision of the board to figure out if we're going for an ask or not.
So is the conversation now, that annual conversation we have about the efficacy of going out for an ask every year?
We need some guidance from the trustees at large about comfort level. Are we going to not go out for an ask? Are we going to go out for a small ask? Are we gonna go out for a large ask? No matter which we decide upon, it's projected right now that we will use some fund balance. The question is, how much fund balance as a board are we comfortable projecting using?
And I know facilities committee hasn't done their review or walkthrough of all the branches yet, but for those of you on the facilities committee, has anything come up yet in your process where you see a major expenditure for the
Yes.
How, right?
We got
in 2018 or 19?
Yeah, we got
All
a
kinds
roof
of
at
worries,
Howe, we
yeah.
got Boeing stuff in the basement, we got the
Got a
river
crack
who
at
runs through
Arbor
it.
Hill.
And we have 10 years of use on all the furniture at all the libraries. And what we don't wanna do is maintain shabby libraries. We set a standard, and this town is so proud of its libraries that it's not going to stand for shabby libraries. So I think that this budget does reflect increased maintenance, which I think it accurately should. And we're facing a dumb budget year where it looks like construction aid could be cut, and we already got bonked this past year, so we can't.
Have you seen numbers yet for any of the anticipated construction costs for the next 2 years?
We can definitely put that together.
Yeah, we
based on
haven't
the
done that, and that was the next step in our process, was
We're
trying to
still
get that.
doing walkthroughs also.
But we've,
Yeah, there's no looming, like, if the roof at Howe, yes, it needs to be dealt with. We have an impeccable maintenance of our systems. We have, really qualified people managing all of that. So it's not going to be from neglect or not paying attention to it. It's gonna be because it was just something that happened.
Sure.
So,
I was just wondering if there are any large costs that aren't taken into account in the budgets we're looking at, that would send us further into the reserve that we should consider.
no,
when
I don't think,
considering.
not that we know of. Unless we have to do something about this, and that's a whole other.
And I would say it's too early to know in terms of where we are on the walkthroughs. I mean, we haven't seen them all, and we haven't
Sure.
talked through each one yet. We're about like halfway through.
Understandable. Well, I have to say that I'm thoroughly confused about all of these numbers and trying to understand, what's going on and what's the estimate and what's the budget and what's the actuals.
I do have, I don't know if you wanted to go into it here, but I could, we did go through 8 options and we had details on all 8 options. The whole point was the numbers, the assumptions in the options on the cost side were very similar. So the one thing from the 8 options that we gave you, given similar to the page 36 that you have in your packet on the cost side, showed you how much of the fund balance we would use. And the other chart that I do think that probably would really help you is if you look at the chart about the amount of assessed value, because you always talk about your neighbors, what people are presently paying on their taxes for library taxes as a homeowners, and what would happen to them, what would the impact be to them if you went up 1%, 1.5%, 2%, all the way up to 5%. So right now, city assessor told me that presently the library tax is $62.854 per thousand, and so that gives you the library tax. So I do think that would be a useful conversation for you guys just to have. I have no problem doing more numbers for you, but I think that's a useful conversation, and then it goes back to where you feel comfortable on that prior page.
Well, for me, because of my confusion and discomfort about it, at this point, I don't feel comfortable going out for a tax increase. And it's not because, if you look at the budget, the 5-year, it's like, okay, wow, we really need a tax increase, otherwise we're gonna have a big problem. But because we haven't been using our fund balance, we're not, we're underestimating, as Sarah raised, and I raised some other concerns about numbers. I don't feel comfortable asking for a tax increase at that point. I could be convinced, but.
I completely disagree with that. I think that our base costs are increasing no matter what we do. We don't do anything. We just keep doing what we do, and our staff costs go up and our insurance goes up. And those are staff. We have legal agreements, and insurance is, completely out of control. And we have buildings. We have buildings that crap happens to. And the state, the state's budget situation is terrible. The federal budget situation is terrible. There's gonna be no pass-through federal money. And we've got buildings to maintain. I think that small, gradual increases every year, and we're talking $100,000. What is it, $150,000 between nothing and 2%? So I absolutely think, as a practice, libraries have to go out every year with the increase that their services accumulate. I mean, we're serving more people. We're doing everything that this community asks of us and even more. We're doing it better, more innovatively with partnerships. I feel like that's a core library trustee value to make sure that this place is adequately funded.
I don't disagree with you at all. And I understand that salaries increase and health and benefits increase and it's unpredictable. I hear you, I agree with you completely, but what I'm seeing happen in the budget is that we budget fund balance and we're not using it. So if our surplus is greater than the amount of our tax increase, what are we doing?
Well, we need some historical information here because we did hear that 3 years ago we used our fund balance of $1.5 million.
No, $1 million.
$1 million, I'm sorry.
And I think that was tied to capital expenditures and not salary or typical annual operating
It
expenditures.
was, you're right.
Here's my concern. When I came on, Scott came on, and I think that Scott was asked to make the budget as lean as possible and to cut expenses and cut expenses, and I think that Mary and Scott and the whole staff has done a great job doing that. My concern is I'm not sure that we're always going to keep being able to go on that cutting more and more, and we've had some great things like the retirement costs have gone down, and we had a good winter one year, so we didn't have to use as much in
Snow.
right heat. Thank you. My concern is then all of a sudden we may have a really bad year, and you're saying we didn't use, was it $49,000?
$340,000. We budgeted.
These numbers are very,
Okay, we budgeted to use $340,000. How much did we not use?
$70,000.
$70,000.
$70,000.
Okay, so that's a big difference though.
And then in 2016, it was $650,000.
Whoa.
Well, it's underspending.
Which is what we,
But if we're saying this is the budget that we want you to spend, and then the taxpayers have agreed that this is what we want to spend, and then you're not spending it, I
Yeah.
don't understand.
I think that we're gonna lose taxpayer faith if we continue to go out for money and it's not.
And that's my concern.
you have to be
as
able
well.
to at least explain it, at least support your case. I don't wanna be in a public setting where, okay, you're delivering this long speech about this tax increase and then someone blows you up. Okay, well, what about that 615,000 and blah, blah, blah. What do you say to that? What do you say to the taxpayer? I mean, I'm a taxpayer too, but, these numbers,
I'm concerned that it's not so much underspending as over-projecting. Because while we all agree, health costs, salaries, some of these are flexible, you have people come and go, you have raises. I think some of these other costs are more or less prescribed. We set a budget as far as, materials or certain facility or, debt service. That's a flat number and it is what it is. And I think some of these numbers, we've been over projecting. So it's not so much under utilizing, but it's over projecting.
Some are cost control, but some are underspending. It would be helpful to have a plan in place so that we really did have details. It's just kind of like getting the vehicle this year. If we really had a plan that we would fix the house roof this year, we did do that, so that then it would be more better in terms of exactly how much you want to invest per year in the library. That's the only shortcoming.
But
that we really.
are those expenses moving off the operating budget and then onto the
Yeah, well,
capital fund
they're,
balance?
no, every expense that we have goes to the operating budget, so that's the bottom line. Even though it's capital, it still shows up in your income statement, it does. It would show up right now, it would show up on the line furniture building improvements if you were to put money into the building.
So then what does it mean that we have $1 million capital expenditure for facilities?
That's
for,
back,
that is for unintended capital expenditures, but you can budget in such a way where your capital improvements actually come out of your capital fund and you have a budget for that and you replenish it and you take that out of your operational budget.
still with the way that we account, everything's gonna be shown, you're gonna still see it when you spend that money on the income statement. We can easily go back, no problem to add 2017 and 2018 estimate. I don't know. I'll put it back to the board. If there's any number that they wanna change on the budget. Makes sense that you have to put more money into the buildings.
Yeah, I just think it's bad policy to spend the fund balance down, period. I mean, that's not what it's there for. It's not there to placate people's concerns about someone spending $12 extra for a service they repeatedly say that they want. Even if we overestimated potentially, and hopefully that's true, that only leaves us in a better position. By $350,000, the use of the fund balance, I mean, that still has us dipping into the fund balance by almost $250,000. It's ridiculous.
But we don't know that we will. Right, so in 2016, we outperformed the budget by $650,000. And that $200,000 of that was the refinancing, I assume. That's why it was so much then.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see some historical numbers, definitely. More data is always helpful. You know, being mindful, of course, of, you know, the role of the board of trustees, which isn't to run the library, but to represent the people that elected us and provide oversight and support to those people that we entrust to run the library, who have done a fantastic job.
Well, so there's a question in terms of fund balance. So what an organization our size with capital, with buildings, as many buildings as we have, what is the recommended amount on hand?
That varies depending on what library you look at. There's no standard. I've always been taught 10%. However, in my research, I've read where people say take six months of your staffing costs. So it varies from organization to organization. One thing that we've changed, which is good, is that we've now separated the reserve fund in capital capital unrestricted, which is a much better move forward instead of just having this budget, you know, this cash reserve. We can do further research. I'm always comfortable with 10%. In the past, I typically have my libraries run in a 10% reserve. However, we couldn't do that because we would spend that down
Well,
fairly quickly with the projections we have.
Right. actually, couldn't you do a projection going 5 years? If we said we want a fund balance, we want a reserve of 10% or even 15%, let's say. We project that over 5 years and project what tax increase we would need each year to maintain that fund balance. You know, have it be a project the fund balance. So we spend that down over 5 years to the point that we feel comfortable with that. Or the facilities, might the facilities committee come in with an estimate of work over the next 5 years that actually takes in account this fund balance?
That would
Okay,
help.
how about that?
That would be helpful.
That's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
So we could actually spend that fund balance in 5 years on the stuff to maintain, right? And then thinking 5 years from that, you kind of have to keep that fund balance, robust enough to fund beyond there, right?
Yeah, and it's the unexpected cost increases, like, one thing that hit this organization and many organizations really hard was a sudden increase in retirement contributions. The last 3 years, we've been pretty lucky to not have to contribute as much money. So as long as the stock market's doing well, that actually benefits the library. So this year, one of the things that we saw was about $190,000 in retirement that we didn't have that we saved up because the stock market did so well. So that's the other reason why you hold the other reason why you hold a reserve, not just capital expenditures, but there could be a stock market crash tomorrow.
All right, so we could actually, we could do an analysis of what we need to hold for reserve. We could actually project, we need this much if the stock market goes wonky and we need to do retirement. We need this much for capital, and we need this much for flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I would really like to see our reserve fund partitioned almost in two. I mean, if you're talking about a 10% reserve for operating costs, and we have roughly a $9 million budget, that's $900,000 in reserve for operating funds. And then the rest of it, I think a 5-year facilities plan or capital expenditure plan, when we're buying trucks, when we're replacing roofs, the rest of it. And I'm sorry, are we at 2.6 or 3.8 in the reserve right now? 3.8. So I mean, if 9 of that went to an operational reserve, then we would have another $3 million for facilities over the next 5 years, and we could budget that out. I think would be another way to consider it.
We're still always gonna need some money in a reserve for facility beyond the 5 years, though, right? Because no matter what, you're gonna have.
That's
Right, well, so the point is if we can justify the reserve at this level for things that we actually need, like facilities, trucks, and operation reserve, then we can have the conversation about how much do you go out for each year.
To replenish it up to that level, or, as far out as we have projected for.
Right.
Right,
Mhm.
and then having that, a
So-
smaller operational reserve, like a 9,000 instead of a 3.8, and if we dip into that, go out and replenish. I would agree.
But also balanced with this practice of having our budget ask reflect our actual increases. So yes, if we can justify the reserve clear, then we take, yeah, but how does that play? So do you have to add more into expenses in order to,
What?
I mean, this conversation kind of assumes that the current level of services provided to the residents of this city are just fine, right? Nobody wants anything else out of the library. You know, we don't, if we're not going out to at least maintain the fund balance or using the fund balance to expand service, innovate, deliver services, you know, it's worse than kicking the can down the road. It's like worse than attrition. It's not even trying. It's deciding not to try.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying, Mike, with improving on services. My concern is just our current budgeting and projections versus actual expenditures. And I think if we could rein projections in a little more, or do what we're talking about with the reserve fund and earmarking once the facilities puts a plan together. I mean, I think certainly we can talk about improving on services and then increasing the budget. I just kind of see them as two different conversations, I guess. So not that this is not improving services, but more or less clearer, more accurate numbers, and knowing what we have before we ask.
Yeah, and I fully support as much accurate, full data as we can get. But I also want to make sure that we're empowering the staff of the library to implement the vision that they have for library services in the city. These are the experts that we entrust these institutions to. And if we continuously each year engage in kind of this uncertainty around the budget dance, it disincentivizes the staff to undertake any sort of innovative long-term service enhancements or improvements. You know, and I think that's where the board's supportive role really comes into play.
I guess my thing is the only thing that we looked at in changing the budget was adding a position for a social worker case manager, not giving any more money to programming, not changing any of the operating costs. That's the only thing that we took into consideration for this budget. And as much as I would love to have the 5-year plan and the facilities, that's not gonna happen within a month. We can make it, again, it would be a projection. It wouldn't be, you know, we wouldn't have real numbers. We're just gonna have to make a projection of what that's gonna cost. And I think that this is a very good discussion, and I do feel that going forward that we should try to be more accurate, but I think that this is becoming a really big issue that might not be able to be solved in a month, and a decision has to be made in a month. Whether we're going out for an ask or not going out for an ask, we as a board have to come to some kind of consensus over this. And I don't want us to lose sight of that in this conversation.
Well, it's definitely true. We've got to make a decision one or the other in a month. But to Mike's point, I think that if we don't know, if we're not confident in the numbers, then we're also limiting the services. So it's not just for limiting the budget, but if we say, you know, this is how much we want you to spend, and that's not spent, then what?
Then we're a healthier, more financially stable organization.
Or we as a board are more diligent when we notice that you're not spending there. We're saying, hey, well, where is the program? You know, we've been talking about this social worker, community outreach person for a gazillion years. We talked about it 15 years before we opened libraries. Like, come on, we gotta do it. And if we're going into we're in bad times, we're going into worse times, you know, all of those social service things, we're gonna be a mess in 2 or 3 years. And we're talking about the budget in 2 years, right? So, I
So if these conversations or this particular topic only comes up when we're a month before the budget and we have to get it done, and then the rest of the time we don't speak about it.
I was thinking about.
Like, really?
I was thinking that, Brenda, and.
You do this
but-
every year.
But you know what, we talked about this at the vote meeting, so we're 1 month ahead. A little bit.
I'd just make one suggestion to that. Stephanie and I were having a conversation about this because we've seen this happen every year. Is that my suggestion? And I talked with Karen about it today. Is having two either January meetings or two February meetings, and dedicating really one to the budget before the next board meeting, so we can have this conversation there. I definitely would like to have this conversation much earlier.
Yes.
All right, so are you suggesting we call another board meeting before the end of February?
No, I'm thinking for next year.
Well, but we've got to get to a decision. There's a lot of still looking at some numbers and talking about what we feel most comfortable moving forward with right now.
And so, and as Allison pointed out, the numbers, I some of the ideas that you suggested, Alyssa and Sarah, were great, but we're not gonna have those by next month. So how do we proceed?
And just for everyone to think about as well, with the projection of 2019, we do not know what's going to happen with this branch either. So we are projecting in right now that our budget is going to increase, but if this branch closes, then that money will not be needed for the rent.
Yeah, but there's no way we're getting out of this situation without figuring out how to service this community, and that's gonna cost something, and we don't even, so.
Right.
So that's it's not gonna be a cost savings if that happens. We're going to have to continue to provide, we're not going to service this community.
Right.
So the cost savings is gonna be probably negligible at that point.
I guess my point is, it's a projection. We can try to make it as accurate and actual as possible, but we're talking in February of 2018 for January of 2019. I mean, we're trying to envision what's gonna happen almost a whole year in advance, and that's very difficult. So I think that we're trying to do the best we can, and I think that we should try to look at, what happened in the past going in the future, but I think we have to start thinking about whether or not we as a board want to see an increase for this year, or if we do not. And if we do, what kind of increase?
So that's a conversation you'd like to have right now? Do you want to take a straw poll?
Well,
I mean, it's also.
I have a couple of observations. One is that this process is so much more transparent and clear and well-informed than perhaps at any period of time that I've been associated with the library. As a staff member, as a board member, and we have such confidence in our administrators, and you take care of business in the way that we want you to. You're exploring partnerships that are really going to be very valuable to us going forward. They're valuable now, they're gonna continue to be valuable. We have full confidence that you're gonna keep, finding ways to make this better and work with it. So, ironically, we're victim to great information and data right now, and we're trying to really mine it for the, perfect situation. I am personally prepared to go out on a limb and live by my personal beliefs, which is that we always need to ask for an increase whenever we go out. And I'm prepared to justify it by what I think is going to happen, which is that our buildings are going to need it, and we're going to have increased service needs, and so but I live with uncertainty, so I'm that kind of person. So if you're not that kind of person, then I suggest that we have another meeting by the end, before we meet again in March to talk more about this, with some of those numbers that we asked for.
I assume that there's a finance committee meeting scheduled. There will be,
There will be.
so that's something that other trustees could attend.
But only the finance committee gets to vote at that meeting.
Right.
Yes. And I think we brought this to you, looking for some guidance to really know where people felt.
Do you feel you have guidance?
I think that everyone's all over the board.
Okay, so let's just do a little straw polling.
Yeah, I actually.
So who, based on what we know right now, wants 0 increase? Okay. So everyone else is willing to do some kind of increase?
No, what was your thing again?
Okay, 0. Who wants 0, based on what we know right now? Okay, great. And so everybody else is willing to go out for something?
Some increase.
If you're willing, can I?
Yeah, please do.
If you're willing to go out for an increase, a moderate or a larger, like, are we thinking about like a 1.5 or like a 5? I mean,
My personal feeling is it's reasonable to go out even regardless for a cost of living style increase, like 1 to 2%.
okay. Want to give me feedback?
I would go for 2. I mean, in the back of my mind is Mike's proposal last year to go out for 5, and there's something that I feel like,
I just don't want to get rejected at 5.
well, I'm not sure that we're prepared to do that, but if we're gonna go out and talk to the community about this, we better ask for something.
I mean, the community's right here, and we're freaking out about North Albany. If we need more money to run something as small as this, then we need to ask for more money.
Well, that's that is certainly clear. We've kind of avoided that whole situation, which is that we've said this is an expensive branch to run, and we're looking at the cost of it and the situation, and we don't go out for an increase.
This has
What does
kind
it
of been
say?
danced around the whole time here. And here we are at the branch. I mean, I find it rather ironic, actually.
Well, because we're really good at making do with what we have. That's how it is, and I think we're in for really hard times, and I think we should go out now before things really fall apart. And we've got goodwill. We go into this year with still goodwill. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We have no idea what's going to happen next year after this year.
IMLS could be gone.
Yeah, well, it absolutely could be, and it's going to take us 10 years to get it back.
I didn't 10 years to get what back?
IMLS.
IMLS,
Museum Libraries.
on the federal level, I mean, it's really vulnerable.
So what percentage of our budget is that funding and the state funding?
Well, a lot of those grants go to systems and to the larger things that support the library community, which all of these professionals absolutely depend on. The library community is the most interdependent, sharing, most efficient, and it's all dependent on these systems. And IMLS supports those systems, and we're in trouble. It goes to the state. To state monies
Yeah.
go there.
The majority of the Department of Library Development under state ed, who we report to, the majority of their budget is from IMLS. So they would be hamstrung. That would probably get rid of a bunch of databases that we use. And at the same time, then those costs would have to be, the state budget would then probably be changed so that money would support DLD. and that's less money for the systems, and if there's less money for the systems, there will be a trickle down and a higher cost that we pay out to the system for certain services.
For example, IMLS money last year that filtered down through the systems was used for job training, career counseling, and job skills, that the libraries held different workshops. That's just an example of the kind of things that we couldn't have afforded individually as
They'll
libraries.
give grants for
And we
professionals.
just approved a strategic plan that says we're gonna cultivate leadership among staff and among others, so,
I also have a concern too, when you speak about facilities and a building, this, that, and the other, and hypothetically, you say, okay, well, I'm gonna do an ask of 1%. Well, what happens when you take a look at the needs of all these libraries and particularly staff, but just look at the libraries alone of the maintenance and you find that we should ask for 3%. I mean, it's just so much about unknown of some things that can be known. If we know that we keep saying repairs, but what exactly does that mean? Put a dollar sign to that because we can do that. So I think having a concern about the budget or a concern about the raises does not mean that we do not support the staff, because we do. It does not mean that we don't have confidence in Scott, because we do 120%. So we're not going to equate that with having support or confidence in leadership here, because we do. But when I sit here and listen and I think about when I go to Washington Ave Library and some of the things that I see there, I'm like, we might need 20%. But where's these dollars to this maintenance that you know that we need? Where is it?
If we had a solid number, I would be more comfortable asking for more.
Where is it?
money.
Yeah,
We do this every single, since I've been here,
And
so.
is it
We
cost?
can't finish the entire plan by the time people are asking for having it. And we've been working on it, and it's just, we're not there yet.
Is it possible to give an estimate of what you've done so far and to know exactly in 2019 what needs to be done? Because I heard a
we
roof.
can do,
I don't know if that
we can
needs to
do
be
Howe
done.
roof, we can do the structural stuff at Howe, and then the
There's
reupholstering
and masonry.
and the
Yeah.
soffit work.
Dan has a list, and he can make cost estimates based on his experience on what each one of those will cost us. We can definitely do that. Our Delaware, we just scheduled for the staff the Delaware walkthrough the beginning of next month, because Dan and I are both away in two separate weeks. But Dan and I could probably, he's already gone through his sheet. So what happens is Dan goes through, he does kind of what he is seeing. Then we do a walkthrough with staff, and the staff point out things to us that we may have missed. And sometimes we point out to staff stuff that they didn't realize. And then the third component is the board goes through and does a walkthrough with us and sees what we're talking about, so it can inform the conversation here.
So these things that we're talking about for how, would they need to take place in 2019?
They don't need to take place in 2019. The roof probably should have been done in 2018. 2019, we can do a Band-Aid repair like we did 3 years ago, and that'll last for a couple of years. So we can live without the repairs to the roof for a while. It'll cause some structural damage inside that we want to kind of avoid. We can do a Band-Aid repair, but if we want to do a repair so we didn't have to keep putting that Band-Aid on, we could definitely do it in 2019.
Right. That's what I'm asking.
So,
we should take care of this in 2019. That's fine. I don't want to see things lumped in that don't have to be taken care of. But if we're band-aiding it, that's something that needs to be taken care of.
We've actually, Dan and I have kind of gone through, and we're working on kind of scheduling it out when we think these things need to be addressed.
Thank you.
So, I feel much more comfortable asking for a tax increase if it's, hey, we need to fix a roof, and that's what we're going out and we're saying. And I also think that I'm perfectly comfortable, even with fuzzy numbers, saying we need 1 to 2% just because of inflation. That's my argument.
I do think we could also take another look at the proposed fund balance earmarks, and I know we won't have perfect numbers, but I'm still unsure. I know what buildings and vehicles mean. I still am not really sure why we have library operations or technology in the proposed fund balance earmarks. Also, our earmarks currently add up to 3.6, and we have a reserve of close to 3.9, so we can add in another 300,000 there.
I think one idea was with the capital, having a separate capital fund from the fund balance is the idea of that's where you kind of plan to spend from for
I agree.
projects.
Yeah.
So you guys say, this year we'll go for, this is how Dana and I discussed it this morning. In 2019, we'll go for a DLD grant for X amount of money to fix the Hal roof. If we don't, we budget that 25% of it in our operations budget, and we hope for the 75% from the staff. And if we get it, that's great. If we don't get it, then we come to the board and say, we need to use 75%. So say it's a $100,000 project, we've budgeted 25, we were hoping for DLD grant money, we're not gonna get it, so can we take 75 from the capital reserve? That's in my experience how these things have typically been handled in other organizations.
And those would come out of technology or library operations lines?
No, they would come out of the capital line. Oh, yes, library. So buildings and furniture, which is kind of our catch-all for all building improvements. That's where we typically, that's where we get our funds to do building repairs. So my thought is it's a $100,000 project, $25,000 would come out of that budget line. We would hope for the $75,000 from a DLD grant, but having that capital reserve fund gives us the ability to still do the work if we don't get the money from the state grants. It's kind of an insurance policy.
All right, so we've talked about wanting some more information in this budget calculation. We've talked about being able to identify some parts of the reserve, the capital reserve, and we want a list of possible 2019 projects that we would do. It sounds like we need to talk about that before a March meeting. So I understand there will be a finance committee meeting, but I suggest that this is actually board conversation. So do I dare suggest that we have a additional board meeting? Do we have enough days to, how many days do we need advance notice?
Oh, for the public, we can.
I tend to agree with you. I think it is terribly dangerous to roll into the drop dead date without having a solid conversation already in the works.
I tend to be in Texas for next week.
Well, our next board meeting is March
13th.
So we've got the last week of February and the first week in March.
Last week of February is the advocacy day week.
28.
Mike's gonna be busy.
But yeah, I don't really have much going on.
He's gonna be relaxed by Friday.
Policy committee.
Yeah, I think it's a budget work meeting, you know? And frankly, we work very well as a board together, and we feel a great deal of collegiality, and this budget process last year was not fun, didn't feel good. And this, leaving it here like this is not, I'm very concerned about what all your concerns are. So,
Do we have work we can do, and if we're scheduling another meeting, I think we should have like a facilitation goals, I guess, or for the meeting, or like it should be a structured conversation. Does that make sense?
how do you imagine that going?
I wasn't volunteering to do it. No, but we should have, like, these are the decisions that need to be made this evening. These are
Yeah,
the
we-
issues on the table.
Yeah, we gotta decide
Yeah.
what
Would
the
that be part of
proposed
the agenda?
percentages that we're going out for.
Right.
And we have to decide what the capital reserve is gonna be, what those projections possibly are. We've gotta live with the discrepancy between 2017 actual, 2018 revised, and 2019 budget. We have to live with those, we have to know what those discrepancies are, and we need to be able to live with them. And we wanna hear from Dan what his, off the cuff estimate of 2019, capital expenditures might be.
So we have information we need decided, and kind of goals for decisions. So I think that's a nice structure, actually. Because we could have that information by that time, right?
I think we should probably also discuss, in committee, we discussed, do we wanna hire that social worker the board has been talking about for a gazillion years?
I agree.
What is our comfort level with, the fund balance, going down to or maintaining at? And I think those also need to be other aspects, which we need to have in the conversation to get to, the tax levy decision.
Alright, so we can try to have a special meeting if we can get a quorum. I suppose we don't need a quorum to have
If
a
we call it an
conversation.
ad hoc, we don't need a quorum, right?
No, we just can't make any decisions, but we can have a discussion, we can sort these things out for the people who can attend.
I think when we're talking about questions like this, we have to get to the point where it's an open meeting with minutes that the public can attend.
Well, that would be true regardless of whether we have a quorum or not.
If we don't have a quorum, we don't really have a meeting.
Still, if more than, I think it was more than 2 trustees are here with staff discussing any library business, it has to be an open meeting.
I wasn't suggesting it shouldn't be an open meeting. I was suggesting
No
that
doubt.
we might
No.
have a really hard time getting off.
I just wonder, like, I accidentally run into Karen at a, event, and you're there. It has to be an open meeting.
No, because you're
No,
not, hopefully you're not discussing
I
library
think it's
business.
important that it be a called board meeting, and we've gotta get enough people there. Because we're talking
too
about
important.
creating,
Very important.
majority, and we're all, hopefully consensus on what I think we should put something out there that we all really can live with.
We do need to do that, and I don't wanna, I wasn't suggesting it wasn't open, I wasn't suggesting we don't do it, it's gonna be a board meeting, I'm just worried about people being able to make it
Yeah.
in the short notice. So we can try, and then it will be open regardless, and we'll do the best we can, time-wise. That's gonna be a challenge. So, but it seems to me that the finance committee would need to meet before that. Allison, do you feel like you have a few questions answered? Do you sort of know?
I still think that I have answers to people's comfort level at this moment, but I think that there's a lot of questions on the table for various board members, and without those answers, I'm not sure we're gonna come to kind of consensus on anything at this moment.
So, how are you feeling about the special meeting, and when do you want that in terms of the finance committee? Like, what's gonna be the role of that committee versus the role of the finance committee over the next month?
I don't see much of a difference if we had a finance committee meeting versus a board meeting at this moment, because we're gonna be discussing the same exact things. The difference in my mind having the whole board meeting is that all the trustees, or almost as many that could attend, would be here, where in a committee, not everybody attends, obviously.
And not everybody votes.
Because not everyone votes.
Well, we could do straw voting at a committee meeting if we had it at the committee meeting, right? if it's just about taking the temperature of the room.
We might get lucky and be able to take care of business and get it up and running,
That's true.
you know?
Go for the
Well,
goal.
Come on,
I think
gotta
the
get
finance
positive around
committee-
here now. We can, get this done now.
I agree.
I mean,
I think
it
I
is a
think
possibility.
I think if the finance committee had this information, it could make a recommendation that this is what it would, could be what it looks like with a certain percentage increase. I mean, really, because that's what we're talking about, an increase or not an increase. I haven't heard anybody saying a 5% increase, Mike.
I said purposefully very little tonight.
No kidding.
So we're having a special meeting.
I want to go to the finance meeting.
I honestly, I'm not sure if there's a real purpose to a finance committee meeting at this point, other than, I'm gonna go with my original statement. I don't think there's any real purpose to a finance committee meeting at this point.
Because you're basically what people are asking for is we don't want a finance committee meeting, we want a whole board meeting to consider what the finance committee meeting would be considering.
Yeah, I think
Well,
it's.
here's the situation, though. Unfortunately, I think the finance committee, you put 8 options in front of us. You didn't recommend one option, which was an increase or not an increase. So I'm kind of confused a little bit by it. I appreciate that we can discuss it, but it wasn't a recommendation.
Which
And-
is fair.
And so that's why we're doing the finance committee work at this discussion here. And if you put something on the table, we can say, well, how did you get here? And how did you get here? And what is this about? And what is this about? And you can answer that or not answer for us. But right now, we don't have any of that. So we either do the work in so either the finance committee does the work in the next 2 weeks and puts a recommendation on the table, or we have a board meeting in 2 weeks and we come up with something to put on the table and hash it out. I'm comfortable with either option right now. In the future, I would like the finance committee to come out with a recommendation, and certainly have the other options there, but I would like a recommendation.
But last year, we did have a recommendation.
Yep.
We did?
Yeah,
We did?
yeah, last year we did.
Your point is definitely not lost on me, and it was a point that was made by other members of the finance committee as well as as staff that was in attendance. But I think some of the at least some of my concerns were the options really included kind of some policy statements such as hiring a social worker, going fine-free, that I
We haven't even
I
talked about
thought
that.
were a little broader. There were some broader discussions to be had than straight up dollars and cents. So that was, I think, at least the way I was thinking about it. I don't know if that was the way the committee was thinking about it, but I have to assume so since we presented these options in this way.
What we had left saying was that we were comfortable adding a social worker in and having a little bit of lead money in for staffing changes. I believe it was $60,000 that we had agreed upon adding to that. We took out fine free because of the fact that we didn't have enough information about how much the fines we actually got, where that revenue would come from. What we were stuck on is the increase or not increase. And, I think we're 3 different people on the committee with 3 different opinions, and we talked about making a recommendation, and then we talked about trying to find out how the rest of the board felt, because we could bring a recommendation about a percentage, and like last year, it became a huge discussion, and it got overturned and got changed, and so that's what we're looking for guidance, I believe, about a percentage, not about, changing the lines or anything like that. It was more of, do we feel that we should go out for an increase or not, and what percentage if we do?
I mean, do we all want to throw out what percentage we're comfortable
Well,
with?
at this
No.
What
We
are we
don't.
gonna do?
So it's,
Yeah.
8,
Yeah.
almost 8:20.
8:17,
We
yeah.
we gotta wrap it up, and thank you for your endurance tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I heard is we decided to have a special meeting. And so we're gonna do that, and we're gonna get some more information, and then we can talk through some of these things in more detail than we were able to today.
May I put it out there that the policy and governance usually meets on the first Tuesday of the month, and we do not have a policy that's needing to be worked on until April.
Okay.
So what is that date?
We could have that meeting time.
6th.
It is
First Tuesday of the month.
Remember when I
That's
cheered when we said we weren't?
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Yes, it would be the 6th.
God bless.
White Tuesdays,
Tuesday.
So I
Do you
would,
have it?
I would make the assumption the three of us are available, because I had that on my calendar.
Yes.
I had already taken it off. No, I didn't. I have it on my calendar. The three of us are available.
Sorry.
I can take my kids to Taekwondo.
There we go.
Okay, so
Can they come do
shall we move on?
Yes. Are we comfortable-ish?
Six.
Okay, with the next steps, okay, great.
Did we
Thank-
set that as the meeting date, or are
Are
we
we
dealing with
saying
that
that's
later?
the
I said we
6th.
set it as a meeting date.
Okay.
It's on my calendar.
Got
So
it.
we're having a special board meeting, not a finance committee meeting.
Right.
Yes.
Got that stuff?
March 6th.
Of course you did.
Can I ask you a question? Does that mean there's no finance committee meeting, or is that still to be determined?
If we have a finance committee meeting, we're gonna be discussing the same things that we're discussing at this meeting. So,
Okay, could the finance committee make sure that we've got this breakout?
I wrote it all down.
Okay.
Yep, and I could, once the capital expenditures piece will be, I guess, from Dan, so as long as we have it, and, yes, you'll have it.
May I make a suggestion?
sure.
Could a holiday finance committee meeting and just make sure that all board members are in attendance? Would that be easier for?
No,
No, because they
can't
can't vote.
Okay.
That's the consensus I heard from the trustees. Are we set on that?
Right.
Yes.
We can meet if you, the finance committee, if you wanna make sure we have all this stuff ready to present, if that would be better.
That's up to you guys.
Okay, we can talk at the
And where
meeting.
is that? At Washington Avenue?
We can find a room in Washington Avenue.
Okay. There's
Maybe
still
we can
more
all go to
meeting.
Center Square Pub after.
Now we're doing policy
And
updates.
is that 6 o'clock
Here.
on the 6th?
Ready for that?
Yes.
You ready? I
No,
guess
no.
that was-
The policies they're not so bad, right?
Okay, so looks like we have a Albany made policy to vote on.
Yes.
So it's been recommended by the committee, so we need a second.
I will second.
All in favor, or any discussion?
Scrooge.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? Next, the hazardous materials policy that Brenda already reviewed with us. Need a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Alyssa. Any discussion on that? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
That is it, okay. All right, so quarterly evaluation of board meetings, we guess that discussion, we have forms to fill out or no?
Do we have them?
No, but you.
No. Yeah, I sent them to you to
Okay.
change them.
I did change them, when I sent it back, I put it in the,
Oh, okay.
so we'll do that next month.
Skip that.
That's okay, we don't have to evaluate this one.
Yeah, let's table that.
Okay, you, if you had any public comment, you're welcome to speak. Thank you for staying
Well,
with us this whole time.
hearing a
5
lot
minutes.
that was been said, I have a lot of ideas and suggestions, but I'll just leave that at that.
Who
My
are
concern-
you?
I'm sorry?
Who are you?
My name's Tony Rodriguez. I'm a community member. I've attended many meetings, especially in regards to the North Albany Library, which is my concern coming here now. A few questions. Scott mentioned there was an increase in the library visitors in regards to North Albany, Albany Leadership International Center.
Yep.
What?
So I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but we're not don't comment on comments. So you can ask questions, we'll take note of them, but we're not gonna.
Okay, so what am I allowed to say?
You can say whatever you want.
We
all
are
5
not allowed to
minutes,
say.
But we're not gonna respond
Okay.
at this point.
Wow. Didn't wrench what I was on a roll here, you know.
Could you clarify why that is for the person asking the question?
That's our policy of public comment. That's our,
Comment, not Q and A.
Right.
Comment.
It's my understanding that staff follows up with
Right.
comments
That's
and
what I'm
addresses
trying
them
to get at.
directly.
So,
That's
Yes.
what Karen said.
yes.
Okay. I guess I'll stay quiet then. Well, I'll just say one thing. Melanie, you made a good point, which I do agree that, if this library was to close, what we're gonna do here, because you need something for the community. And, you know, this community, it needs this library, it needs something here to, you know, for the kids to go to and adults and everybody to utilize the resources that we have here. So I agree with you on that part that, you know, if the library is closed, whatever money is gonna be used, where's that money gonna go to? You know, have this library, if it has to close, that money has to be utilized somewhere. I think someone else mentioned that as well, this young lady here. You mentioned that also, that if the library was closed, where's that money gonna go to? You know, it has to be utilized for something. So you may save in closing this library, but now that money has to go somewhere else to be utilized for something more useful. So I'll just leave it as that, since I can't say anything else.
You can
You
say
can
anything.
say
No,
anything.
well, there's a Q&A, that's why, you know.
If you wanna ask questions.
What it
that's
is
okay.
if you ask a question, we don't respond to it at this point, we will follow up with you later
Oh,
and respond to it.
Okay. So my question was,
That's
Scott,
what
was,
we're getting to.
what was the percentage of the students?
We didn't get a
Oh,
number.
you didn't get a number?
No, we
Okay.
didn't get a number.
Now, was there, was that based on weeks, months? No?
We can't,
Okay,
but,
okay.
but we're happy to follow up.
Okay. My other question is that, I was not able to attend the January because I was sick, but I know Steve Long was there, he was very vocal of ours in regards to the Hope 6 grant, which I'm familiar with because, God rest her soul, Councilwoman, Sarah Curry Cobb was part of that, as far as the money in regards to the Y and Albany Housing Authority. So I know there was a lot of money that went towards it. There was an agreement that the library stay here and be funded with that Hope 6 grant and what Howard follows all that. So I know Scott mentioned that he's waiting to hear back from the attorneys from Albany Housing Authority as well as the library to find out details on that. The I's and cross T's and cross the I's and dotted. And my other question is, Brenda mentioned about an advisory board. I'd like to be part of that. When is the meeting and how would I sign up?
Thank you, Tim, follow up.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sitting through one of our longest,
Thank
the
you
longest
so
meeting I've
much.
attended, so thank you.
It took a lot for me to stay quiet.
Okay.
I had other questions, but I just wanted to move through the budget because I had a decision that could I go to another conversation. So.
Well, we'll talk after.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so, ready to vote for adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
All right. All
it's
in
already
favor?
seconded.